We can go race realism. What's your contention with it?
Oh, in all, the alt-right have no real method of implementing their ideas. Race isn't real in terms of anthropology and biology. It's not held by the consensus.
Okay, hold on. You're
And
already
even if
going.
it's real,
You're already going
okay,
to a
yeah.
bunch of different
So one
places.
point at a time.
So, starting off with the alt-right, just acknowledging the things are different is not an alt-right talking point. You can say that the alt-right
Sure,
is using the science incorrectly, and I wouldn't argue with that. But to just say the alt-right uses this, therefore it's not a real thing, is a silly thing to say.
No, I would just say that. I just said in the way they use it, it's not real.
Well, how? Okay, how?
In classifying different people as different races outside of a sociological sense, like they will break things down by biology and anthropology when they are the mainstream.
The alt-right is the mainstream?
No, I just said they're outside of the mainstream.
Oh, I thought you said they are the mainstream.
Can you hear my mic well enough, or because I actually just replaced it?
Okay, I still maybe I'm not understanding like what that has to do with anything.
We're going to talk race realism. We have to define our terms. What does race mean?
Race
and
is just
if it's simply external differences between two different sets of people, you run into all kinds of problems classifying things by races.
Well,
an Italian person might not look the same way as a Nordic person does, but you wouldn't. They're both still Caucasian.
That's true, yeah, but we're talking race, not jingoist, you know?
Okay. Well,
like,
what is race?
ethnicity and race are not the same thing.
Yes, I agree. Ethnicity and race are not the same thing. If you want to go by a strictly old school biology sense, it's Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid as the three primary races, but you get such in amongst the races that it doesn't really make sense to keep classifying them differently.
Well, I don't think anybody's denying the fact that there is more difference between, or there's more difference inside of groups than there is between groups. I don't think anyone's arguing that.
Yeah, but then you occasionally run up to problems with similarities and how you classify those. Like if it's by skin color, if that's the differentiating feature that defines one race from another, you can look at things like the sub-Saharan African, black skin color, and the Australian Aborigine, black skin color, but they're not the same race. So it's really just a bad term. Lineage is like the preferable term, but it's a bad word to describe things.
But are you denying the differences between groups? I don't understand what your contention is. Just the definition of it. I'm not a biologist. I'm not defining the differences.
Well, if you're talking about the classification of species, is that what you're going for? Liberal?
Yes.
Okay. So so there's just a lot of things that got hung up with Andy and everybody. If you're not understanding how the scientific community classifies different organisms and their subspecies, using the colloquial terms for race and the scientific words for species are going to fuck you up way hard.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's short. Yeah. Well, that's the problem. Sinatra. The reason I agree with liberal Sandy Project for somewhat here is that in order to delineate further into subspecies, like for example a different race, like for Asians being a different race than white people, they would have to classify Homo sapiens sapien as a species instead of the subspecies that it's currently classified as.
Yeah, I think...
Yeah, and this is called a divergent species. Or, I'm sorry, divergent evolution.
Well, I think that's why a lot of the times even people like Charles Murray are more happy to call it populations instead of race.
Yeah, but
and
then again,
I'm perfectly willing to...
but the alt-right will continuously default back to any terms they can use to justify what their end goal is.
I mean, I'm perfectly willing to talk populations instead, but it doesn't change the science behind it.
Yeah. But if they were to change Homo sapiens sapien into its own divergent species, I wouldn't have a problem with what the alt-right is saying. But they haven't, and until they do, they're wrong. There's no such thing as a subspecies.
Well, I'm perfectly happy with how they did it when they wrote the bell curve. is they basically sent out.
Well, they did it in a sociological sense then.
Well, they did it, and they were like, well, if you say you're white, you're going to be white. If you say you're black, you're going to be black. It's not like people in America are going, well, I'm sub-Saharan African and Aboriginal Australian. You're still black. You know, it doesn't matter.
There's actually a problem with that. I can get into that. The descriptor for identifying people based on skin color, you can have a white person who has mixed race parents, has a black mother and a white father, and that person is exactly as white as Obama. He might be allowed in the ethno-state, but Barack Obama wouldn't. So even then, it's a troublesome classification.
More often than not, people who are
self-identity, weird.
More often than not, people who are biracial will just automatically consider themselves black. So
I don't know.
That's
depends how light their skin color is.
Well, this is anecdotal, sure, but I've never seen a person who wasn't biracial not consider themselves black. You know?
Maybe.
I think maybe it's because the black gene is more dominant, but anytime someone's biracial, they will consider themselves black.
On the problem that even if race is real, and I'm actually curious on this because I've heard you you've straddled the fence a bit. Like you have a video where you actually call yourself alt-right, and then there's another video where you like alt-right as like right-wing SJWs.
I don't think I've ever called myself alt-right. I think I've called myself alt-light.
I think you said that in this video where Hillary Clinton was talking about the alt-right.
Oh, well, I think the video that I said, it's more like if that's all right, then I would be all right.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't consider you alt-right.
The alt-right definition has changed, you know.
Yes. Well, I mean that's relevant to the conversation. Is the definitions of concepts like white has changed. So when we get to dealing with ethno-state warriors, we're trying to figure out who's allowed in the ethno-state and who's not. And
your mic is cutting out a bit.
Okay. When it comes to the issue of ethno-state warriors, they try to figure out who is allowed in their idealistic ethno-state and who isn't. You run up to some very weird purity spirals with them. And that's the central criticism.
It sounds like
race is a very weird.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what?
It sounds like you have more contention with what the alt-right is saying than what I'm saying about the differences between populations.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm
yes,
not,
but
I'm not the alt-right. I cannot defend their positions on it.
Well, but I think when you say things like race is real, you kind of straddle their positions on it.
No,
like, and I'm not saying this like as a disparity, you know, to disparage you. Like, I don't mean to like talk down to you or condescend to you, but a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this, a lot of people don't understand how race is, like what race is, and it's very hard to define. If you ask people for a definition, you're gonna get wildly different answers.
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding what you want me to argue here, though. Is I'm of the mindset that yes, there are differences between populations. So what? I'm not saying there should be policy done on this, and I'm saying any policy that is done on this, whether it be affirmative action or ethno-state type policy, probably isn't the best way to handle it. So I'm not sure what exactly you're looking for me to defend here. Like, do you have contentions with what I'm saying, that there's a standard deviation difference between IQs?
Oh, but I don't think that that's really relevant to anything. I think IQ is just a bad measure of intelligence because it can't measure things like creativity.
Yes, it can.
It doesn't measure every kind of intelligence.
IQ measures general intelligence, and visual spatial is the highest. Like, there are questions on the IQ tests that are similar to, like, you need to rotate this object 360 degrees in your mind, and that plays off your creativity to understand what the back of an object looks like.
Well, here's.
I'm just going to say that if we have an intellectual anomaly, based Mama getting 140, I think the test is flawed, sir.
Well, she doesn't believe IQ exists, so I guarantee you she's just pulling that shit out of her ass. But go ahead.
By the way, I'm an expert on this.
What?
Yeah, what the fuck? Yeah, how much
You're
Rick and Morty
fucking with me, aren't you?
Anyway, the issue is IQ genetic or is it environmental? Well, it might be both. but
No.
there is no hard science that says
No,
that
there's
it's both.
not. And okay, so we understand now that IQ is 50 to 80%. It has a 50 to 80% heritability rate. There's no arguing that.
Where do we understand this from?
It's as heritable as height is. IQ is 50 to 80% heritable, but you can have. We'll use height for an example. You can have genes, and you could have the heritability to be as tall as the Dutch, but you might not have the environment to be as tall as a Dutch. So for one side to win out over the other, you have to come to the conclusion as to what is more pertinent in someone's life. So if you look at it a certain way, it's the old corn experiment. You can take corn and plant it in the Sahara Desert and plant it in a good field, and you will get different corn, even though it's from the same genetic things. So environment does play a factor. But for environment to win out over the factor, you'd have to account for the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect being for IQ differences to be explained completely environmentally, blacks today would have to be living in the same environment as whites in the 50s. Can you prove that?
Okay. No.
So then it can't be just purely environmental.
Yeah, we're not disagreeing here. I'm not saying it's purely environmental. All I'm saying is there isn't any hard science to back that any of it's genetic. It probably is genetic.
Well, the way to study that would require a lot of ethical breaches, like taking children from across the world from their parents immediately as they're born, and then raising them without human contact. Basically, like a remote, like a fucking, what is that? It's not Klingon. What's the fucking Spock dude?
I don't watch Star Trek. Corbin Thomas was to say, "Sir, my IQ is extremely high."
Yeah.